Hello and a very warm welcome to Middle East Matters. I'm Sanam Shantier. Coming up on this week's show, signs of regular life are slowly returning to Aleppo. One of them, a train ride through the ravaged city after 4 years of civil conflict. Lebanon's largest Palestinian refugee camp is under threat amid an outbreak of clashes between the country's Fatah movement and Islamist groups. Also coming up, Mr. Gay Syria, a documentary about a group of Syrians trying to get into the Mr. Gay World competition. The director joins us on the show from Istanbul. We start with Egypt, where Hosni Mubarak, the country's toppled president, notoriously the first leader to go on trial in the wake of Arab Springs, was ordered to be freed from detention after 6 years. He was cleared of murder charges of protesters this month in his final court appearance. According to his lawyer, the 88-year-old would be barred from leaving the country pending an ongoing corruption investigation. Now, for 6 years, we've seen daily images of destruction and suffering pouring out of Syria. However, since the embattled city of Aleppo was clawed back from the Islamic State group over 2 months ago, an image of hope, with the railway station reopening. This as life slowly returns to normal for the local residents.
It was once Syria's crown jewel. 4 years of heavy fighting has turned Aleppo into a battlefield, a pile of rubble, a place where despair has taken over. The city's great mosque, once an architectural masterpiece, is in ruins. The bridges also bear the marks of heavy shelling. Many destroyed factories and public amenities like this swimming pool remain idle in this ghost-like city. With entire neighborhoods wiped out, the brutal Syrian civil war has left one of the region's oldest cities a skeleton of its former self. The battle for Aleppo ended over 2 months ago, and at first sight, a sense of normalcy seems to have returned to the city. This train used to carry thousands of passengers every day, taking them to Raqqa and Baghdad. Authorities have just restored the first 11 kilometers of the line after it was closed for 5 years.
Before reopening, they had to conduct a landmine operation as there were still mines on the tracks.
Among passengers that day, many students on their way to university.
Look at all this. There are no more power lines or running water. Houses are in ruins.
And when the train reaches the former rebel-held quarter, the city simply becomes unrecognizable.
It's as though I was discovering this landscape for the first time, even though it's my home. I know this city by heart.
This area was controlled by a rebel group whose signature is still on the walls. Thousands of civilians fled in the last months of the siege, when the Syrian government and its Russian ally intensified the bombings. Today, some people like Amer Aid are courageous enough to return and move back into what's left of his home.
The wall had huge cracks and was leaning in a dangerous manner, and last night it just collapsed.
Part of the reason Amer came back is to keep looters away, even if that means he has to live in dire conditions.
We have just a little bit of electricity, and the washing machine isn't any good because we don't have running water.
Moving towards the old city of Aleppo, the former front line, Abdurrahman Ali is the living memory of this famous souk, where he worked for more than 60 years.
The merchants used to sell spices, meat and other products.
His textile shop has been looted, but more importantly, he wants to show us what lies behind this door. The old city's 800-year-old hammam.
People used to sit here in little groups. There also used to be rugs, and we drink tea.
The misty and fogged atmosphere is gone. The hammam is now a series of cold corridors, haunted by pre-war memories.
I think every person in the country is in part responsible for all this destruction. It doesn't matter what side people are on. We fail to address our differences. Every time I come here, my heart breaks. What kind of future are we leaving behind for our children?
Abdullah believes the chances of Aleppo reappearing on traveling brochures are slim. He's well aware that while buildings can be restored, the social fracture within the city's population will be another challenge far more difficult to overcome.
Palestinian refugee camps in the region have suffered at the hands of conflict over the recent years. Nahr al-Bared in Lebanon was wiped out in 2007 as a result of fighting between Islamists and the Lebanese army. The Yarmouk camp on the suburbs of Damascus was reduced to rubble during the Syrian civil war. Now, Ain al-Hilwa, the largest Palestinian camp in Lebanon, is also threatened by combat. Our correspondent on the ground brings you the latest.
Friday, the Islamic Day of Prayer. Several hundred inhabitants of Ain al-Hilwa come to offer their condolences to Maha's father. 4 days earlier, the 17-year-old was killed by a shot to the head as he attempted to put out a fire.
My son was innocent and a victim of injustice. He's been killed, but he isn't the only victim. In Ain al-Hilwa, 100,000 of us suffer amid fighting, shooting, ceaseless clashes.
These outbreaks of violence pit Fatah, the Palestinian party founded by Yasser Arafat, against an array of radical Islamist groups. In all, some 20 militia fight for the ground.
All the factions, without exception, have failed. They're all rotten. God has sent us a curse. Our rulers, they don't care about our fate. And they're working to destroy our camp.
With at least 70,000 people, Ain al-Hilwa is the largest Palestinian camp in Lebanon, counting for more than a third of the inhabitants of Sidon. In fact, its population has increased by almost 70% in the last 10 years, and the living conditions inside the camp are deplorable.
Nowadays, drugs and pills are spreading in the camp, corruption in all its forms too. It is through corruption that one can divide the brothers. It's all our fault.
During his sermon, the imam of the great mosque that adjoins the camp pushes the Palestinian fighters to face their responsibilities, ridiculing popular conspiracy theories as he does so.
Who are the fighters? Is it the Israelis, the Jews? Are they the ones in the camp, perhaps? Who is it? Are the Russians fighting inside? Who's shooting? Who's killing? Who's forcing people to flee? You're the ones doing this.
As a consequence of the Cairo Agreement signed in 1969, the Lebanese army has no right to enter the camps, so Ain al-Hilwa serves as a refuge for many jihadists.
There are outlaw groups that are not part of the Palestinian national movement. They endanger the security and stability of the camp.
128 radical Islamists, sought after by the authorities, have found a safe haven in the camp. This Hamas official points out the lack of effectiveness of the joint security forces of the Palestinian factions.
The problem is that in the past, this Palestinian force was not strong enough to deal with security threats. Now we're going to be more strict because we risk losing control of the camp. We realize that the situation is serious and we're prepared to assume our responsibilities the way we should.
But without any improvement in the socio-economic situation of the camp's inhabitants, his promises will probably ring hollow.
The Islamic State group have waged a violent war on homosexuals in Syria to raise awareness of the persecution, not just in the conflict-ridden nation, but in the Middle East. A Turkish director follows a beauty contest in Istanbul called Mr. Gay Syria. Among those competing, Syrian refugees. Now, in the documentary, which is yet to be finished, you'll have everything from a catwalk to flamboyant music to leather hot pants. And to tell us more about the project, we're joined by the director, Ayşe Toprak. Ayşe, thanks for joining us. Now, from your research, beyond the threat of, obviously, extremists like the Islamic State group, what is it like living as a homosexual in countries like Turkey and Syria?
Hate crimes against sort of the LGBTI community in Turkey has been growing, basically. The biggest problem can be the lack of legal protection towards the LGBTI. There's violence against LGBTI individuals. They constantly complain of harassment and abuse, etc. And even amidst their close circles, sometimes it's family members. But for Syrians, it's kind of a double edge of the sword because Usually when refugees arrive in Turkey, they build communities around their ethnic or religious groups. But for gay Syrians, they're also outcasts within their fellow citizens. So rejected by their communities and being gay and in a Turkish society, they have a lot of difficulty finding housing and jobs. Usually most of them need to become sex workers, which can be quite dangerous. Two of the friends of the characters in the film were actually killed during the making of the film. So it's actually even more difficult for them because they're Syrian refugees, and refugees in Turkey don't have rights. They're not even considered as refugees, actually. They're only guests by the Turkish state.
Now, the winner of the contest was actually threatened.
Yes, I mean, the threats that he got were mostly from his family, and that was after they learned that he's gay. It's a very thin line, what's threatening and what's not threatening. And when you start to work with people who become a part of your life, you have to believe their word that, you know, when Hussein tells me I'm threatened, then I take his word. And it does happen within families, but sometimes families, it's also a way of sort of closing connection off with your son, etc. So I don't know how real the threats are, but just the fact that somebody has to, even if it's not true, just the fact that somebody would say that they're threatened in itself is very problematic. But
Ayşe, have you had any difficulties since coming into the spotlight?
I mean, the one place where it came to the spotlight was the crowdfunding campaign, actually, because before that it was only within the funders and the filmmaking team that the people who knew about the film were only those. But in the crowdfunding page, we have had some really, really offensive comments and offensive emails coming to me, etc. It hasn't been threats, but they have been quite offensive towards my characters as well. So it's not threats per se, but still,
you mentioned the crowdfunding. There's a possibility that this film may not actually be finished.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we're very much short of funds, and we need to find more in order to continue our post-production, basically. And it hasn't been an easy film to make, especially in Turkey. The topic is very it's not a topic that the government would fund. So our resources have been limited, and therefore we decided to launch a crowdfunding campaign. And it's also a way of building a community around the film as well before the film is launched.
Ayşe Toprak, thank you for speaking to us from Istanbul, and thank you for watching Middle East Matters. Do stay tuned to France 24.